May 20, 1943. As dawn broke over the endless cornfields of Valgena, Iowa, Sergeant Klaus Weissbach of the Africa Corps stepped off a military transport train into what seemed like an impossible reality. The 24-year-old veteran of Rommel's elite 15th Panzer Division blinked in disbelief, his eyes struggling to process the abundance before him. What Weissbach saw defied 7 years of careful Nazi indoctrination about America, a nation supposedly crippled by the Great Depression, weakened by racial mixing, and incapable of true industrial might. Instead of the expected prisoner camp surrounded by barren lands, he faced verdant farmland stretching to the horizon. Farm equipment, more tractors in one gathering than he had seen in his entire life in rural Bavaria, sat in neat rows outside a newly constructed camp. Massive grain silos towered nearby, and the morning air carried the scent of fresh bread. Most shocking was the casual demeanor of the American guards, who seemed remarkably well-fed and unconcerned about their prisoners, as if victory was so assured that these captured elite soldiers posed no threat whatsoever. It was the strangest feeling, Weissbach would later write in a letter smuggled home. They treated us almost with indifference, as if we were not the vaunted warriors of the Reich, but simply an inconvenience to be managed. And when I saw the breakfast they served us, white bread, real coffee, eggs, and bacon, I knew something was deeply wrong with everything we had been told. How could a nation that fed its prisoners better than we fed our civilians possibly be losing this war? What Weissbach and thousands of other German prisoners would experience over the next 3 years in America's heartland would systematically dismantle their worldview. The abundance they witnessed wasn't merely unexpected, it was ideologically impossible according to everything they had been taught. As one prisoner would later testify, in America, I discovered the greatest defeat of all, the defeat of our beliefs. The journey of these prisoners into the American agricultural paradise began long before their capture. Throughout the 1930s, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels had carefully constructed an image of America as a failed state. Germans were taught that the United States was still trapped in the Great Depression, with unemployment ravaging its cities and farms lying fallow. Newsreels showed carefully selected images of Dust Bowl devastation and bread lines in urban centers. American democracy was portrayed as chaotic and inefficient, incapable of mobilizing for war. Most importantly, Nazi ideology insisted that America's racial diversity was its fundamental weakness, a mongrel nation that could never match the industrial and military might of the racially pure German state. This carefully constructed worldview was reinforced through every aspect of German society. School textbooks portrayed Americans as culturally inferior, decadent, and soft. Military briefings emphasized America's material shortages and production limitations. Even as America began supplying the Allies through Lend-Lease in 1941, German military intelligence consistently underestimated American production capacity. When the United States formally entered the war after Pearl Harbor, Hitler himself dismissed America's military potential, declaring that the soft, consumer-oriented nation could never transform into a serious martial power. By 1943, the German military had begun to recognize America's growing industrial output, but the average German soldier remained convinced of fundamental American weakness. The first large groups of German POWs, primarily from the Africa Corps after their surrender in Tunisia in May 1943, arrived in America still believers in ultimate German victory. Despite their defeat in North Africa, most remained committed National Socialists. A U.S. Army intelligence report from June 19, 1943 noted that approximately 70% of incoming prisoners display unwavering confidence in German victory and express Nazi ideological viewpoints when interviewed. The American prisoner of war program was unlike anything the Germans could have imagined. Under the Geneva Convention, the United States was obligated to house, feed, and treat prisoners according to the same standards as its own troops. But what the Americans considered standard treatment struck the Germans as extraordinary luxury. The War Department established over 500 POW camps across America, with a significant concentration in agricultural areas where prisoner labor could help address the severe wartime farm labor shortage. Camp Algona in Iowa became one of the largest, with a main camp housing 3,000 prisoners and 19 branch camps scattered throughout Iowa, Minnesota, and the Dakotas. The prisoners arrived to find clean barracks, adequate medical care, and food rations identical to those of American soldiers, a daily caloric intake of 3,400 calories, nearly double what civilian Germans received at home. Captain Reinhard Miller, a 29-year-old company commander captured at El Alamein, recorded his initial impressions in a diary later confiscated by American intelligence. "The camp is beyond belief. We have hot water, decent beds, and 3 meals daily that surpass officer rations in Germany. My men are suspicious. They believe this is an elaborate display meant to demoralize us. I have not told them that I share their suspicion, though I wonder how the Americans could maintain such a deception across an entire country." The first crack in the German prisoners' ideological armor often came through food. In Nazi Germany, meat had become increasingly scarce, with the average civilian ration falling to less than 150 grams weekly by 1943. Butter was a luxury, and coffee had been replaced by ersatz substitutes made from roasted grains. In Algona, prisoners received daily meat rations, genuine coffee, fresh milk, and vegetables in quantities that seemed wasteful by German standards. Friedrich Schmidt, a 19-year-old private from the Hermann Göring Division, wrote, "Today I watched an American guard throw away half a sandwich, just discard it as if it were nothing. I wanted to leap from my seat and retrieve it, not because I am hungry here, but because I cannot stop thinking of my mother's letters describing how she queues for hours for a small ration of bread. Have we been fighting a nation that is so wealthy it can throw away food while we sacrifice everything for scraps?" The prisoners' journey of discovery accelerated when they began working on Iowa farms in the summer of 1943. Under the Geneva Convention, enlisted prisoners could be required to work in non-military capacities, and the desperate need for agricultural labor made the arrangement beneficial for both the American government and local farmers. Prisoners received 80 cents per day in camp scrip for their labor, while the government charged farmers the prevailing wage rate, creating a program that eventually produced a $100 million profit for the U.S. Treasury by war's end. For many German prisoners, their first day on an American farm delivered a series of profound shocks. The scale of American agriculture defied comprehension. Individual family farms in Iowa often exceeded 200 acres, larger than many German villages. The mechanization was equally stunning. While German agriculture still relied heavily on horse-drawn equipment and manual labor, even modest Iowa farms possessed tractors, mechanical harvesters, and other equipment that represented unattainable luxury in wartime Germany. Karl-Heinz Hackbarth, a 22-year-old tank gunner from the 10th Panzer Division, described his first day working on the Jensen family farm near Clarion, Iowa. "Herr Jensen operates his 240 acres with only his son and now us 3 prisoners. In my village, such land would require 30 workers at minimum. His tractor does the work of a dozen horses, and he speaks of purchasing a second machine when available after the war, as if such an expensive item were as simple to acquire as a new shirt." I asked how many families this farm fed, and he looked confused. "Just us," he said, "plus whatever we sell." The waste inherent in this system is incomprehensible. The abundance extended beyond mere size and mechanization. German prisoners were astonished by the casual attitude toward resources that were precious commodities in their homeland. Rubber tires, gasoline, leather goods, and metal tools, all severely rationed in Germany, were used with minimal concern for conservation. When machinery broke, parts were readily available for replacement rather than requiring elaborate repairs to extend their life. Otto Freiberg, a former Hitler Youth leader who had volunteered for the Waffen-SS at 17, found his ideological certainty crumbling as he worked through the summer of 1943. The farmer's wife, Mrs. Miller, apologized because coffee was rationed to 1 cup per meal, he wrote in a letter to a fellow prisoner transferred to another camp. She was embarrassed by this hardship. I did not have the heart to tell her that my mother has not tasted real coffee in 4 years. When I mentioned that the bread was exceptionally good, they insisted I take an extra loaf back to camp. They treated this gesture as insignificant, but I nearly wept at such casual generosity. How can we possibly defeat such a nation? As the harvest season progressed, the prisoners encountered increasingly irrefutable evidence of American abundance. They witnessed the massive grain storage systems, the efficient transportation networks that moved agricultural products, and the seemingly inexhaustible supply of fuel and equipment. Most devastatingly, they saw firsthand how a small percentage of the American population, farmers represented less than 15% of workers, could produce such overwhelming agricultural output that food rationing in America was minimal compared to the severe restrictions in Germany. Werner Baumann, a 26-year-old mechanic who had served in a panzer maintenance company, found himself repairing farm equipment on the Collins farm outside Cherokee, Iowa. His technical training made him particularly valuable, and through his work, he gained additional insights into American industrial capacity. Today, I requested a replacement gasket for the tractor engine. I expected this would take weeks to procure, as it would in Germany. Mr. Collins simply drove to town and returned with the part in under 1 hour. When I expressed surprise, he laughed and said, "Son, this is America. We make more of everything than anybody needs." I begin to think he is right. And this terrifies me for what it means about our chances in this war. By late autumn 1943, American intelligence officers noted a marked shift in prisoner attitudes. Captain Howard Ferguson, in charge of prisoner re-education at Camp Clarinda, Iowa, reported, "The prisoners who have worked the harvest season show distinct changes in their perspective. Their questions have shifted from, 'When will Germany send our forces to liberate us?' Fear, to practical inquiries about American farming techniques and equipment. Several have requested English-language materials specific to agriculture, and discussions among prisoners increasingly focus on the discrepancy between the America they were taught about and the America they are experiencing. The overwhelming evidence continued to accumulate. While working the fields, prisoners observed the endless stream of military convoys on rural highways, moving troops and equipment to coastal ports for shipment overseas. They saw new factories rising on the outskirts of even small towns, hastily constructed to meet war production needs. Most importantly, they witnessed a society that continued to function with remarkable normalcy despite being 2 years into a global war, a stark contrast to the all-consuming sacrifice demanded of German civilians since the war's beginning. Some prisoners resisted the implications of what they were seeing. The most committed Nazi ideologues insisted that the abundance was an elaborate facade, constructed specifically along transportation routes where prisoners would travel. This theory collapsed when prisoners were dispersed to hundreds of different farms across multiple states, all displaying similar levels of prosperity. Others argued that American abundance came at the cost of military readiness, a notion that became increasingly difficult to maintain as they read newspaper accounts of growing American forces in Europe and the Pacific. Franz Kramer, a former Nazi Party official who had been drafted into the Wehrmacht in 1942, documented his struggle to maintain his ideological convictions. "I have tried to explain what we are seeing as exceptional. Perhaps this region is unusually prosperous, or perhaps the Americans are deliberately showing us their best farms. But such explanations grow weaker each day. How can I reconcile the Germany I know, where every resource is carefully managed, where civilians sacrifice daily, where the war effort consumes everything, with this America, where farmers complain about price controls on crops while eating meat 3 times daily? The mathematical impossibility haunts me. If this is America's agricultural heartland operating under wartime restrictions, what must their full industrial capacity be?" Winter brought new revelations. As farm work diminished, many prisoners were reassigned to food processing plants, small manufacturing operations, and construction projects. These new assignments provided glimpses into other sectors of the American economy, each delivering fresh evidence of overwhelming industrial capacity. In Estherville, Iowa, prisoners worked at a meat processing plant where, in a single day, more livestock were slaughtered and processed than many German butchers would see in a year. In Mason City, German prisoners helped construct new grain storage facilities of a scale that seemed surreal compared to European standards. Emil Berger, a 32-year-old former factory worker from Dusseldorf, was assigned to a small manufacturing plant that had converted from producing farm equipment to making components for military vehicles. His experience in metalworking made him particularly valuable, and his observations were especially devastating to Nazi claims of industrial superiority. This factory in this small Iowa town employs more workers than many German facilities. The precision tools, the assembly line efficiency, the raw materials, all are of a quality we would reserve for our most essential military production. Yet this is merely one small facility among thousands across America. Today I learned they have built 16 automobile factories since 1942 solely for producing military trucks. 16 entire factories. The mathematics of our defeat are written in these numbers. The winter of 1943 to 1944 brought another shock for the German prisoners. Despite wartime conditions, fuel for heating was abundant. Food rations remained consistent, and their American guards received regular packages from home containing luxury items like chocolates, cigarettes, and canned delicacies. The prisoners' own circumstances became a source of cognitive dissonance. They were experiencing better living conditions as prisoners in America than many had known as free men in wartime Germany. This reality became especially clear when the Red Cross began delivering mail from home in early 1944. Letters from family members in Germany described deteriorating conditions, increasing food shortages, nightly bombing raids, and the conscription of ever younger and older men into military service. The contrast between these accounts and the prisoners' daily experience in Iowa created a psychological crisis for many. Wilhelm Köhler, a 28-year-old former school teacher who had served as an artillery officer, collected these contradictions in a journal he kept hidden from both his fellow prisoners and American authorities. Today I received a letter from my wife. She writes that she stands in line for 6 hours to receive 100 grams of meat, and our daughter has never tasted a banana or chocolate. Yesterday, our lunch here included both meat and fruit cocktail. My evening meal contained more protein than my family receives in a week. How can I possibly explain to them that I am gaining weight in captivity while they slowly starve? And if America can feed its prisoners this way while fighting a global war, what does it say about everything our leaders have told us about this nation's weakness? Spring 1944 brought new assignments and further evidence of American abundance. As prisoners returned to agricultural work, they witnessed the planting season with fresh perspective. Having now spent nearly a year in Iowa, they could observe the agricultural cycle with more understanding and growing disbelief. They saw how few workers were required to plant vast acreages, how readily fuel and equipment were available despite wartime conditions, and how the entire agricultural system operated with an efficiency that made German practices seem antiquated by comparison. The statistics they encountered defied Nazi propaganda. Iowa alone produced more corn annually than all of German-occupied Europe combined. A single American farmer could manage production that would require a dozen German agricultural workers. The mechanization of American agriculture had freed up millions of workers for industrial and military service, a strategic advantage that became increasingly clear to the prisoners as they read about growing American forces overseas. Erich Lehmann, a 19-year-old who had been captured during his first week of combat in Tunisia, gradually transformed from a devoted Hitler Youth member to a quiet skeptic of everything he had been taught. Today I learned that this region of Iowa alone produces enough pork to feed 2 million people annually. The farmer laughed when I expressed amazement, saying this is actually a reduction from peacetime levels. I cannot stop calculating what this means multiplied across America. They have converted some agricultural capacity to war production, yet they still produce such excess food that prisoners eat better than German civilians. The war was lost before it began. We just didn't know it. By mid-1944, as news of the D-Day invasion reached the camps, American authorities noted a significant shift in prisoner attitudes. Major William Kennedy, the commanding officer at Camp Algona, reported, "Prisoner morale has undergone a remarkable transformation. The formerly cohesive Nazi elements have lost considerable influence, and the majority of prisoners now openly discuss German defeat as inevitable. More telling is their curiosity about American agricultural and industrial methods. Many have requested technical materials and educational opportunities. They are no longer merely enduring captivity, but preparing for a post-war world they now recognize will be shaped by American power." This transformation manifested in subtle ways across the camp system. Nazi insignia and salutes, once common among prisoners, largely disappeared. Camp authorities noted increased voluntary participation in work programs and educational activities. The prisoners began to segregate themselves not by military rank or unit, but by their political orientation. Those who maintained Nazi loyalties became increasingly isolated from the majority who had begun to accept the reality of German defeat. The summer of 1944 delivered perhaps the most profound revelation to the prisoners. As they worked through the growing season, they witnessed American agriculture operating at peak efficiency despite the absence of millions of young men who were now fighting overseas. Women, older men, and now prisoners filled the labor gaps, yet production continued at levels that seemed miraculous by European standards. More telling was the calm confidence of their American hosts. Despite sending their sons to war, despite occasional rationing of consumer goods, the farmers maintained an absolute certainty in ultimate victory that seemed rooted in their material superiority rather than mere patriotic faith. This certainty proved devastating to German morale in ways that military defeats alone could not achieve. Kurt Werner, a 25-year-old former bank clerk who had served as an infantry sergeant, described this psychological impact. "The Americans do not hate us as enemies. They pity us as misguided. This is somehow worse than hatred would be." Their farmer Carlson speaks of Germany's reconstruction after the war as a settled matter, something that will surely happen once we abandon our foolish ideas, as he puts it. When I see the casual power all around me, the endless fields, the machines, the factories visible from the highways, I understand his confidence is not arrogance, but simple mathematics. They produce more steel in Pittsburgh than all of the Reich. How did we not know this? How did we believe we could win? The prisoners' gradual acceptance of American superiority took many forms. Some embraced it, eagerly learning English and agricultural techniques they hoped to apply in post-war Germany. Others fell into depression as their entire worldview collapsed. The most committed Nazis retreated into denial, creating elaborate conspiracy theories to explain away the evidence before them. A few attempted escape. Though these efforts were remarkably half-hearted, where would they go in this vast foreign continent? And why would they abandon the relative comfort of the camps for uncertainty? By autumn 1944, as Allied forces pushed into Germany itself, the last pretense of German victory evaporated among all but the most fanatical prisoners. Their attention turned increasingly toward the future. What would become of Germany after defeat? And what role might they play in rebuilding their shattered homeland? Their observations of American agriculture and industry now took on new significance as models for what might be possible in a reconstructed Germany. Otto Gerhardt, a 33-year-old engineer who had been drafted into service despite initial reservations about the Nazi regime, found himself making detailed notes about American farming methods. Today, Farmer Mitchell showed me their crop rotation system and soil conservation practices. When I expressed interest, he brought out agricultural bulletins from their state university and explained how scientific farming has increased yields by 300% in 2 decades. I am collecting this information not as military intelligence, that would be absurd at this point, but as vital knowledge for Germany's future. We must learn from these methods if we are to feed our people after the war. As Allied forces liberated concentration camps in early 1945, news of Nazi atrocities reached the POW camps in America. This revelation delivered the final blow to any remaining ideological commitment among the prisoners. Many refused to believe the reports initially, but as evidence mounted, including testimony from American soldiers from Iowa who had witnessed the camps firsthand, the prisoners faced the full moral collapse of the regime they had served. Wilhelm Hoffmann, a former Hitler youth leader who had once conducted ideological training sessions in the camp, wrote in April 1945, "The news from the camps in Poland and Germany has destroyed whatever remained of my belief in our cause. I think of how well we have been treated here as prisoners, the decent food, the medical care, the absence of cruelty, and compare it to what German camps inflicted on their inmates. The contrast reveals everything about the societies that created these systems. America did not need to treat us humanely. They did so because their system values human life in ways ours did not. This is the most painful recognition of all." By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, the transformation of the prisoners was profound. Army surveys conducted at Camp Algona found that 73% of prisoners acknowledged they had been systematically misled about American capabilities, and 68% expressed interest in emigrating to the United States or implementing American methods in post-war Germany if permitted to do so. Their bodies told a similar story. Medical examinations showed that the average prisoner had gained 11 pounds during captivity, with improved overall health despite their status as prisoners of war. The impact of this transformation extended beyond the prisoners themselves. The Iowa communities that had initially regarded the German POWs with suspicion gradually developed more complex relationships with them. Farmers who worked closely with prisoners came to see them as individuals rather than faceless enemies. Cultural exchanges occurred despite official discouragement. Prisoners produced artwork, music performances, and crafts that impressed their American hosts. By war's end, many farmers submitted formal requests to sponsor specific prisoners for immigration after repatriation, though such arrangements were rarely approved. Harold Jensen, who employed 6 prisoners on his farm near Clarion, Iowa, told the local newspaper in June 1945, "These boys came here believing we were their enemies. They'll go home knowing we treated them fairly. That might be worth more than any military victory in the long run. They've seen what America really is, not what Hitler told them, but the truth. And they'll take that truth back to Germany." The prisoners themselves recognized the profound nature of their experience. Franz Weber, a 26-year-old who had arrived as a committed Nazi in 1943, wrote shortly before repatriation, "I came to America a convinced National Socialist. I returned to Germany an advocate for democracy and free enterprise. This transformation happened not through propaganda, but through observation. What I have seen here, the productivity, the standard of living, the freedom combined with order, represents a system superior to anything I previously believed in. My captivity has been my liberation. The irony does not escape me." The legacy of the German POWs in Iowa extended far beyond the war years. When the prisoners were repatriated in 1945 and 1946, they carried back more than memories. They took practical knowledge of industrial farming, technical skills, and a first-hand understanding of American society that contradicted lingering Nazi mythology. In a Germany desperate to rebuild, this knowledge proved invaluable. Several former POWs eventually fulfilled their wartime ambition to emigrate to America. U.S. immigration records indicate that between 1952 and 1960, over 300 former German prisoners who had been held in Iowa applied for and received permission to immigrate. Many settled in the Midwest, some even returning to the communities where they had been held as prisoners. Their unique perspective, having experienced America first as enemies and then as immigrants, provided a powerful testament to the transformative power of direct experience over propaganda. Otto Heinrich, who returned to work for the same Iowa farmer who had employed him as a prisoner, told the Des Moines Register in 1956, "As a prisoner, I thought perhaps they were showing us only their best, that real America was different. As an immigrant, I discovered the abundance I saw was real and widespread." This country defeated Germany not just with weapons, but with productivity that made our industrial efforts seem like a child's attempt by comparison. What a strange journey to discover truth as a prisoner and freedom as a former enemy. The program's impact on American agriculture was equally significant. The labor provided by German POWs helped maintain agricultural production during a critical labor shortage, allowing American farms to supply not only domestic needs but also to feed substantial portions of Europe through the war and immediate post-war years. Iowa farmers produced record harvests in 1943 through 1945. Despite sending thousands of their sons to military service, an achievement made possible in part by over 12,000 German prisoners who worked the fields during this period. The statistics tell a compelling story of this agricultural might. Iowa alone produced over 300 million bushels of corn annually during the war years, enough to provide basic caloric needs for over 20 million people. This production occurred on farms averaging just over 160 acres, typically operated by a single family with minimal additional labor. By comparison, German farms of similar size would require workforces 4 to 5 times larger to produce significantly less output. This productivity gap represented more than agricultural efficiency. It revealed fundamental differences in industrial capacity, resource allocation, and system effectiveness. The German prisoners witnessed a society that could simultaneously fight a two-front global war, supply its allies, maintain civilian consumption at levels Germans would consider luxurious, and still treat prisoners with humanity and adequate resources. This experience delivered a more profound defeat Nazi ideology than any battlefield loss could achieve. As Klaus Weissbach, the sergeant who opened our story, wrote in his final diary entry before repatriation in March 1946, "The greatest defeat Germany suffered was not military, but ideological. Our leaders told us we were the master race, superior in all ways to our enemies. Here in Iowa, I learned the truth through simple observation. A system that values individual initiative, scientific advancement, and human dignity will inevitably outproduce one based on central control and racial mythology. The true wonder is not that Germany lost this war, but that we ever believed we could win against such a colossus. In America's cornfields, I have seen the future, and it is not what we were promised." The story of German prisoners in Iowa represents more than a curious historical footnote. It illustrates how direct exposure to reality can dismantle even the most carefully constructed ideological edifice. These men arrived as products of the most sophisticated propaganda machine in history, convinced of their racial superiority and Germany's inevitable victory. They departed as witnesses to a different truth, carriers of knowledge that would help rebuild their shattered homeland along different principles. Perhaps the final irony lies in the unintended consequences of the POW program. In sending captured German soldiers to America's heartland, the United States not only solved a practical labor shortage, but also created thousands of first-hand witnesses who could testify to American strength in ways no propaganda could counter. These prisoners experienced the productive capacity of American society not as statistics on a page, but as lived reality, the abundance of food, the scale of farms, the efficiency of production, and the resilience of a system that could wage global war while maintaining domestic prosperity. In the quiet fields of Iowa, far from the battlefronts of Europe and the Pacific, a different kind of victory was secured, not through violence, but through revelation. The German prisoners who worked these fields experienced a profound transformation, one that would influence Germany's post-war reconstruction and integration into the democratic West. Their journey from ideological certainty to evidence-based reality mirrored the larger journey Germany would make in the decades following the war, from the destructive mythology of Nazism to the productive reality of democratic capitalism. As former prisoner Walter Hines told his grandchildren many years later, "In Iowa, I learned that the greatest power is not found in weapons or conquest, but in creating abundance so great that even your enemies can share in it." This was America's true victory. Not that they defeated us through force, though they surely did, but that they showed us a better way forward through simple daily example. In the cornfields of Iowa, I discovered both the lie I had lived and the truth that would set us free.